All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with Ecology Notes number 3, Eco-Relationships. We've already talked a lot about the energy flow as different amounts of energy flow through food chains and food webs as different organisms are eating one another. We've organized ecology into several different groups. Now we're going to take a look at how these different organisms interact together. So again, make sure that either you're taking notes in some kind of printer paper formation like this or some kind of notebook. That said, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so relationships in ecology. We need some kind of goal, so let's go ahead and get that out of the way. Our goal in understanding how organisms interact is to interpret and analyze them. So the reason I chose the words interpret and analyze is it's one thing to see a wolf eat a rabbit and say, hey, yeah, they obviously had some kind of interaction. But it's another thing to be able to interpret and analyze why the wolf ate the rabbit. And no, there's no deeper psychological meaning behind it. It's just understanding why organisms interact the way they do. The short answer of this is because they need food, water, shelter, mates, and protection. 4 of those things are necessary resources that pretty much every organism needs. That would be food, water, shelter, and of course, mates to continue on. And then, of course, protection is just something that's nice to have. If you're living as an organism, it would be nice if you were able to do that safely. What we're going to go over in this very short lesson are 3 long-term relationships or 3 long-term interactions, 2 short-term interactions, and then 2 things that have a lot to do with this that's going to help you understand it a lot better. That said, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, symbiosis. Symbiosis is a concept. It's a kind of close, long-term relationship between 2 organisms. Now, when I choose my definitions, I choose each and every word very carefully. Because when I want you to consider the idea of a symbiotic relationship, you need to understand that it must fulfill every word in this definition. First of all, a symbiotic relationship has to be close between 2 organisms. You're not going to see a symbiotic relationship from a moose in northern Alberta and a crocodile in southern Florida. They're not close to each other. And even though if you put them together in the same room, they might have an amazing fight, or who knows, they may work together and have a phenomenal mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Because they are not close in the same area, part of the same community or the same ecosystem, it cannot be a symbiotic relationship. Also, it has to be long-term. A symbiotic relationship must be long-term. Just because you went to the zoo one time and pet a camel on the head and fed him a little bit of corn doesn't mean that you two now share a mutualistic long-term relationship. It has to be something you see pretty much day to day inside the community. And we'll get into kind of why it works this way. So let's just dig right in. The first symbiotic relationship that we look at is called mutualism. Now notice I have a little parentheses here with a plus sign next to a plus sign. This means both organisms benefit. And the classic example of this is the flower and the bee. The bee lands on the flower and drinks some of that delicious nectar so it gets some food. And then the flower gets to shed some of its pollen onto the legs and coating of the bee, who then carries that pollen around and pollinates other flowers, therefore allowing the flower to sexually reproduce. So the flowers get to spread and live, and the bees get a nice meal out of it. It's mutual. Both organisms benefit. There's a slightly creepier example that a lot of people are not fans of, and this would be the mites that live in each and every one of your eyelashes. Please don't freak out. These mites are very useful. These are little tiny bugs that crawl around in your eyelashes, and the mites get food and shelter out of the deal, and what you get is the nasty dead skin cells removed. So right below that, go ahead and write that the mites get food and shelter. And so they have a nice little smiley face. And you get your dead skin cells that kind of accumulate in your eyelashes. You get those removed. So your mites and eyelashes have a mutualistic relationship. Next, commensalism. No, this is not communism. Read the whole word. Commensalism. Notice there that it's a plus sign and then kind of like a tilde. It's like that wiggly sign. That just means and that's pretty much the definition of commensalism is one organism benefits and the other is unaffected. So in a commensalistic relationship, one organism gets something really great out of the deal and the other could care less. Best example, a bird that nests in a tree. So again, for this drawing, it's pretty simple. Basically just draw the letter Y, draw the bird in the fork of the letter Y, and then draw an ugly cloud above it. So you'll see the bird gets shelter and food, and the tree doesn't care. Tree isn't really harmed, tree doesn't mind. The bird gets a place to nest, gets a place to raise its young, and also may get a nice meal out of eating some insects in the tree. Insects that probably aren't bothering the tree at all. The tree doesn't care. Tree just continues to grow and really doesn't mind. Parasitism. So this is the symbiotic relationship that most people think of other than mutualism. Parasitism has that plus and minus because one organism benefits and the other in turn is harmed, like a parasite. Most common example is usually a pet and a flea. So the cat is very unhappy. It's probably either going to get some kind of itching soreness, maybe a disease if it's exceptionally unlucky. The flea, on the other hand, he's having a really great day. He's getting a nice meal of blood, which therefore gives him food and water, and the thick hair on the back of the cat is going to give it a nice place of shelter. So that's a parasitic relationship. Now, parasitic relationships are some of the most common in all of ecology. In fact, there's a lot of other examples that we could go over. Many types of bacteria, not to mention fungi, especially things like athlete's foot. Guys, by the way, this is why you don't wear shoes without socks. And especially this is why you shouldn't wear the same pair of shoes 2 days in a row. The hotter and sweatier your shoes are, the more likely you are to grow mushrooms on your feet. That is athlete's foot. That is fungus that is eating you alive. So wash your feet. Don't forget all different kinds of worms, tapeworms, heartworms, different kind of things that can live inside organisms. Mosquitoes are indeed parasites. They come along and suck blood like a flea does. And even different plants can be parasites, like different kinds of weeds, and indeed like mistletoe, which definitely hurts and kills plants that it wraps itself around. There are a ton of different examples of parasites, and we may go over that at a different time. But we need to think about something. Why do these organisms do what they do? So how do organisms count on each other to do these jobs, whether mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic in nature? Well, this is because every organism has a job in an ecosystem. This job or role that an organism has is called its niche. Now, by saying niche, if there are any other ecology type teachers watching it, they're cringing right now because supposedly the correct pronunciation is niche. And I hate that, and I've always hated that, and I will die on the hill that it should be pronounced niche. However, again, the niche is just the role or job of an organism in an ecosystem. So again, let's take an example. If we have a nice bear, the bear's job in an ecosystem is to eat fish and eat berries. That is its job. It fulfills a specific role as the organism to eat those two things. Now, at first that looks kind of weird. Wait a minute, it's its job? The ecosystem relies on the bear to do that? Absolutely. And as we're going to look at here in a second, after we look at two short-term relationships, you have to have something eating things in the ecosystem. Otherwise, things get out of control. But let's take a look at the other side of niches for a second and remember this extremely important rule. When it comes to a niche, you can only have one organism in that slot. Only one organism, one species, I should say, in an area, only one population can be the one who eats fish in an area. That's it. Only one. Only one organism can go around eating the berries. And here's why. Because when you put two things in an area that want to accomplish the same task, you're going to have a massive, massive problem. Let's talk about some of these, but first of all, let's look at how a niche may be fleshed out. Predation. So predation, you may notice where we get the word predator, is an organism eating another organism to fulfill its niche. Best example here, anything that eats something else, like an owl and a field mouse, like a lion and a gazelle, like a tiger and anything that comes near a tiger, like a coyote and a rabbit. You'd fill in the blank, something that eats something else. Pretty simple. Good for the animal doing the eating, bad for the animal not doing the eating, being eaten. So that's predation, basically just the fulfillment of the niche. However, what happens when you have two predators try to occupy the same space? Or you have maybe two plants that try to occupy the same area of sunlight, like two different kinds of flowers, or perhaps two different kinds of trees. You get something called competition. Now notice in the parentheses, competition has two minuses. The reason competition has two minuses is because it's very, very bad for both organisms. In this case, organisms fight to secure food, water, shelter, and mates. Any kind of organism can compete with another type of organism, whether it's bacteria, whether it's protists, fungi, animals, or plants. They can all compete. And what I don't have written in the notes, but what you really, really should know, is that there are only 3 possible outcomes to competition. When two organisms compete, let's say wolves and coyotes, there is only 3 possible outcomes for competition. Either one organism, or either the organism is going to win, so it's, going to win. It's going to get the food, or it's going to get the water, it's going to get the shelter, it's going to get the mate. It's going to lose, and it's going to leave, so it obviously is losing the fight, so it's just going to leave and try to find food, mate, water, whatever, somewhere else. Or the organism is going to lose and die. So again, there's 3 outcomes. You can win, and therefore you get the prize, to the victor go the spoils. You can lose and leave, or you can lose and die. And that will be a question that I ask on upcoming quizzes and the test. So when it comes to competition, you only have 3 results. So for example, let's take the wolves and coyotes fighting over the regions of southern Canada, like southern Alberta, southern Ontario, northern Michigan. These wolves and coyotes are fighting over the territory in these large woods in order to get the most food, water, shelter, or mates. So you kind of almost have these like little county territories where there will be all wolves or all coyotes. Because if they ever mix, then either the wolves are going to win, or they're going to lose and leave, or lose and get killed by a large enough pack of coyotes. And that's also usually how they fight. Usually it's 2 to 3 wolves for about 8 or 9 coyotes. And some of these fights are very, very terrifying. I've been up in northern Wisconsin while some of these fights were going on kind of in the area, and it's a very scary thing to hear outside. Finally, how do all of these interactions work together? Like, how do all of these niches function? Well, they all come together in this very interesting concept called the carrying capacity, which is a really simple idea. The carrying capacity is just the maximum number of a niche an ecosystem can continually support. Now, that sounds like a very fancy definition that really just means this. There's only so much food to go around. Let me put it this way. Only so much grass can grow in a field, which means that there's only enough grass for some rabbits to eat. And that means there's only a certain amount of rabbits for the hawks flying around to eat. So while the niche of the hawk may be to eat the rabbits, and the niche of the rabbits may be to eat the grass and be eaten by the hawk, it all depends on how much grass there is available, which therefore will mean how many rabbits there are available, which will therefore determine how many hawks there are available. Allow me to explain. Let's say that one year in a 100-acre grass field, all of the rabbit moms have double the normal amount of babies, which means now there are twice the number of rabbits. Well, they're going to eat twice as much. What happens if during the year the rabbits, because there are so many of them, eat all of the food? Well, the rabbits are not going to have any more food. So, yeah, there will be more hawks because the hawks will see this huge amount of rabbits roaming around the field and they'll definitely have a nice lunch. But if all of the rabbits eat all of the food and then either die because the hawks eat them all or because they starve, because no food left, that means there's no food now for the hawks, which means the hawks will die off. You go through this weird fluctuation after a couple of generations, and you will eventually get about an average amount of grass that grows per year, which will therefore give you an average amount of rabbits in the area, which will therefore give you an average amount of hawks that are able to live. So that's the concept of a carrying capacity. It's kind of like how many niches can fit in a certain ecosystem. Now, don't worry if you're still confused, if you're not really getting this one. This is more of a concept that we're going to be talking about in the next notes. What do you need to know, though, as we finish this? Well, basically, you need to have an idea that there is a shared impact between all of the organisms in an ecosystem. And they can be long-term relationships, mutualistic, commensalistic, or parasitic, or they can just be animals fulfilling their niche and being predators or growing in an area. When you put two animals in the same niche, they compete, and it's really bad for both of them because, again, it's exhausting. Even if the wolf beats the coyotes for a meal, it's still wasted a lot of energy fighting off that coyote. So it's going to have to eat a lot more to make up for it. If you keep in mind that the constant interactions of organisms can have positive and negative effects on the different organisms in the area, then you've succeeded in getting what I wanted you to understand for the lesson. And with that, we can kind of bring you to a few of the announcements that I have. Again, remember, all assignments are still due on time on Google Classroom. I just found out from Mr. Atkinson, he talked to a few of my students and they said, hey, we don't even know where to go for Kinnett stuff. That is the absolute silliest nonsense I've ever heard. You know it's on Google Classroom. It's always been on Google Classroom, and it will continue to be on Google Classroom. Next, we will be having a class meeting, whether it's on Zoom, whether it's on Google Meet, no matter what it is, we will have some type of meeting on Monday, April the 27th. That's for green classes and for red classes. Is attendance required? I'm going to say soft yes. I'm not going to require attendance to the point where I'm going to be really upset if you don't show up, but you really should be there so that you can hear what's going on in the next couple of weeks and so that questions can get answered. So you're going to want to watch for that Google Classroom announcement. And then finally, if you have any questions about the lesson, you can always post on Google Classroom about it. If you have any questions in general, email me. That is the best way to reach me at any time. Other than that, hope you guys have an excellent week. If you need any help, shoot me an email.